Eating healthy on business travel is challenging not only because travelers are often confronted with more unhealthy options than healthy ones, but because no one really knows what food is anymore. This episode 38 is titled Travel Healthy, a Road Warrior's Guide to Eating Healthy with Natasha Léger, on the healthandwellness.com podcast, where we discover and share new alternative health tools and resources from alternative healthcare practitioners and experts.
And I just realized something's got to give here. And I certainly, I didn't want to wind up with health problems. I considered myself to be healthy at the time, didn't go to the doctor regularly, none of those things. But I was starting to get concerned that if I didn't start being more proactive, that I could be putting myself down the road, the path to having health problems. And I didn't want that. My vision of life is one where we live with pure vitality, and that when it's time to go, I want to go quickly. I don't want to be hooked up to machines. I don't want to take, blockbuster long-term drugs. None of that. I want to be vibrant.
And welcome back to alternativehealthtools.com. So today we have Natasha Léger with us. Rather than give you a big, long introduction, I think we'll just jump into it. The conversation started, like so often it does, where you find out this person on the other end of the phone is somebody really interesting. It has a lot of experience in alternative health, and sometimes comes up with a product or a service that is really, really valuable for other people. So, Natasha, I wanted to welcome you.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So we are on December 31st, 2015. This is the final show, actually, for Alternative Health Tools, and to be released next week. And I really can't think of a better topic to talk about. Traveling from 2015 into 2016, how to travel healthy. So I'm always curious about how people got into what they're now doing.
So I'm an international trade attorney turned global business consultant turned author. And the book that you referenced is called Travel Healthy, a Road Warrior's Guide to Eating Healthy. And I wrote this book because I wish the book had been available to me when I first started my career as a traveling consultant. And I was eating at the office or at a client site or at a conference, 3 times a day. And I came home one night and I felt like a toxic waste product. And I decided to open up one of my juicing books that had a cleanse in the back. And I started thinking, maybe it's time for a change. And so I embarked on this 3-week cleanse that radically changed my life, really radically changed the way I thought about what I was eating.
Do you know what kind of cleanse was it? I mean, was it
Yes, it was a 3-week bentonite clay cleanse.
Nice. I know what that is.
Yes. So, after the 3 weeks, it's interesting. People started telling me, wow, you look really clean from the inside out.
From the inside out? How did they know?
Well, I don't know. I guess it just must have been that glow. And I didn't have acne problems or anything like that, but it was just the wear and tear of the stress of work and just the way I was eating. I mean, I'd start off my day with coffee and latte, and then then I'd have something down at the cafeteria, and then I'm traveling, so I'm on the go. I would pick up whatever's there. Lunch would be ordered in for us. Then there's dinner that's ordered in, and I don't get home until 11 o'clock at night. And I was looking forward to a glass of wine to decompress, and that was my cycle.
How long did that go on?
For a couple of years. And I just realized something's got to give here. And I certainly, I didn't want to wind up with health problems. I considered myself to be healthy at the time, didn't go to the doctor regularly, none of those things. But I was starting to get concerned that if I didn't start being more proactive, that I could be putting myself down the road, the path to having health problems. And I didn't want that. My vision of life is one where we live with pure vitality, and that when it's time to go, I want to go quickly. I don't want to be hooked up to machines. I don't want to take, blockbuster long-term drugs. None of that. I want to be vibrant.
Yeah. It's really interesting you say that, because that's the second time I've heard that from a coach in the last 2 days. This notion of hanging on, in other words, with drugs and all this other,
Well, exactly. It's not my personal view of quality of life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I realized, it was time to take things into my own hands. And as a result of doing that cleanse, so during the cleanse, as you know it, you don't eat any sugar, no dairy, no meat products. It's basically a raw foods diet. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for the 3 weeks, and I saw the big change, and I started shifting what I was putting in my grocery cart, mm-hmm. and started shifting what I was eating at work and on the go. And then Thanksgiving rolled around, and I looked into my grocery cart, and I realized I did not have one processed food, with the exception of canned tomatoes, in my grocery cart.
Strictly by focusing on what? Did you focus on just not buying anything that had a label, or?
No, because I was juicing so much, okay. I was just buying a lot of fresh produce. Mm-hmm. And I just shifted from saying, okay, well, if I'm putting this into the juice, then I should also be eating that as my whole solid food, mm-hmm. as well. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of the juicing process, that got me to eat more and more whole foods. And it also took me down the path of learning more and more about foods, mm-hmm. because your exposure to food is a function of the environment that you're in. So and I like to say, if, a convenience store is your only access to food, then that's what you think your universe is. Mm-hmm. And so what's so important is to expand that universe and start to understand what the options are. And once I did, it was mind-blowing, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. as well as physically rejuvenating and revitalizing.
Mm-hmm. And at that time, you were starting to travel, or you were traveling quite a bit?
I was traveling. Yeah. I was traveling. So I started to become a lot more conscious of what I was eating, and also more conscious of making those choices, because so many times when you're in a business environment, somebody says, well, let's go to lunch, mm-hmm. And you usually go with whatever place the person selected, and you don't really think about it, and you kind of hope that you'll find something that you like. And so I started really taking a more active role in saying, well, wait a minute, if I want to make sure that I'm eating something healthy, I have to play a part in that decision of what that restaurant is going to be like. So I started doing a lot more research on the places that were around, and I stopped frequenting some places, mm-hmm. and started others. So all of these different active choices I started to make. And getting back to the book, is I was at one of these ubiquitous conference dinners in Chicago, mm-hmm. about 2.5 years ago now. And I was sitting next to a lady who asked me how I, keep up with being healthy on the road, because she was a health fanatic herself, but she just took on this new job. She was traveling 50% of the time. Her stress factor was through the roof. She mm-hmm. was working 15 hours a day. And so she said, well, you're just as busy, just as stressed as me. How do you do it? Because I fell off the wagon.
Yeah.
And so I started giving her some of my tips, and she's like, oh, well, that seems logical. That seems to make sense. That seems practical. That's not, mm-hmm. that's not overwhelming. And then she said to me, you should really write a book for the rest of us because we need hope on there on what to do because it feels hopeless when you're traveling for business because you feel like a victim. You're a victim of the fast food places at the airport. You're a victim of delayed schedules. You're a victim of hotel room service, et cetera. And so I went home and I wrote 80% of the book in about a month.
Wow.
Because it just poured out of me.
Yes.
And, like so many things, it's getting that next 20%.
I know.
God. But when I wrote the book, I realized a couple of things is that there are a lot of nutrition, diet, and health books out there, but they don't address the business traveler. And if they do, it's usually one page and they tell you bring your own snacks.
Yeah. Now, when you were traveling, how many days, were you doing the typical, like, fly out on a Monday morning, return on a Friday, or was it sporadic? Or
for me, it was a little bit more sporadic. I was traveling perhaps every 3 weeks or so. Okay. But it would depend on the project that I was on. In some cases, it could be every 2 weeks. In other cases, it might be every month. In other cases, for a period of 2 or 3 months, I might be traveling every other week. So it depended because my travel was project-based.
So who is the book really written for?
So the book is written for my fellow business travelers. So someone that knows that they're having a hard time eating healthy on the road and trying to make the healthy choices. But part of the problem is this issue of healthy. What is healthy today? It's so confusing because of all of the marketing that's around it. And what I mean by that is low fat, low salt.
Okay, so are you a proponent of low fat not being such a good thing?
So my view of things is that you need to focus on the nutrient value and you need to focus on how food is grown, how it's processed, and how it's prepared. And so one of the things that I did in the book is I realized that there was a need to redefine our understanding of food. When I looked up the definition of food, I realized that it was circular. So I don't know if you've ever looked it up, but food is defined as anything that will sustain you or give you energy. Mm-hmm. Well, a candy bar will do that. But that doesn't make you healthy. And if you look at the definition of health and healthy, it includes being illness or disease free. So I realized that the word that we use to describe what we should eat has nothing to do with health. Mm-hmm. So I coined a new word called Nouri, Nouri.
Yeah, I really love it.
Thank you. And I connected those two pieces. I connected what we eat to the health impact. So the short definition of Nouri is non-processed, non-genetically modified, non-chemically treated, hate to use the word food again, but food that increases your immune system, that promotes energy, and reduces the risk of illness and disease. That is a lot of responsibility in one little word. And you asked the question of fats. My long definition of Nouri in the book is any plant or animal-based protein, fat, carbohydrate, vitamin, mineral, or phytonutrient that is ingested in liquid or solid form that improves the cellular functions of the body to strengthen the immune system, promote energy, and reduce the risk of illness and disease. And I included all of those pieces in there because of all the marketing that's going on around each one of those pieces. But the issue is that most people don't know where their vitamins come from. They don't know where the fats come from. They don't know, where the carbohydrates come from. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, what's really important is to focus on that stage. And Nouri is really in its whole unprocessed, untreated, unaltered stage, because food, in my opinion, has become a very bad word to describe what we should be eating because it has become so adulterated. Mm-hmm. So step number one in the book, again, was the one key tool is to change the word to make it easy for people to identify what they should be eating. So now when you see a menu item, you can actually ask yourself, well, is that Nouri? Mm-hmm. And
simple.
Very simple, very simple. And, people have said this has really transformed my way of thinking about things, because before the reaction would be, oh, I really shouldn't have that because it's bad for me. Mm-hmm. Well, what does bad for me really mean? So when you start to think about what is unhealthy or bad for you, you think in terms of, well, is it going to destroy my cells? Is it going to contribute to weight gain? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is it going to negatively impact my metabolism? All of these things that lead to disease. So once you ask yourself, well, is it Nouri? And if the answer is yes, then great, thumbs up. Mm-hmm. But here's the challenge. Okay, so what if it's not? Mm-hmm. And this is the problem that most business travelers run into. Well, what if it's not? Well, if it's not, then the next question has to be, well, is it worth the damage right now?
Yeah.
Because you're making a conscious choice, right?
Right. And I ask myself that question before I'm going to eat something, that's questionable, which is, is it, what's the price I'm going to have to pay here?
Exactly. And speaking of price, it's one of the other things I talk about, because when we make our food decisions, we really need to think about, one is return on investment and return on asset. Again, I'm using business terms from
Sure.
my background to help a lot of people think about, what we're doing differently. But the return on investment being $1 of unhealthy food equals $5 of healthcare costs.
Yeah, when I read that, it solidified what I've always thought. It's just really expensive.
Well, exactly. You can either, my view is you can either pay the farmer or you can pay the doctor.
Yeah, good.
But you're going to pay for it one way or the other. And, hopefully by paying the farmer first and making sure that you have those quality ingredients, is that you're not going to not only have to pay the healthcare costs, but also not have to go through all of the emotional distress that's involved in illness, and not only your own, but your family and friends around you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would say, I've heard people say this, where, I have really good health care. And I personally think the way healthcare is set up in this country, it's anything but healthcare. I mean, it leans towards fixing a problem that really, if you were eating right and taking care of your health, would have never existed.
I agree with you 100%. My view on health care, or rather health insurance, mm-hmm. is that to your point, we're not talking about health, or we're talking about wellness. What we're really talking about is financial insurance in case you have something catastrophic so that you don't go bankrupt, And so there are lots of issues with the premise that we have right now. And like you, I know a lot of people that say the same thing, that say, well, I don't have to worry about it because it will be covered. Mm-hmm. But my perspective is that's not the issue of it being covered. The issue is, do you want to be sick? And I personally don't want to be sick.
Right. When people talk about the expense of Whole Foods or whatever is, how expensive it is to be healthy, I simply ask, have you ever really had to pay for diabetes? Have you ever had to pay for cancer?
It's so funny. I reconnected with a friend couple months ago that I hadn't spoken to in years. And so first thing she said to me, well, how are you? And I said, well, I'm great. I'm physically, spiritually, and mentally fantastic and happy. And she said, well, I've got to get that. Where do you get that?
Yeah, from your website, right? What is your website again, by the way?
So it's travelhealthybook.com.
Aha. I actually knew that, but I wanted you to say it.
Why, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So who is this book really geared towards? I mean, we know it's for somebody that's traveling and wants to be healthy. But when you sent me the book and I started reading it, I realized that it's a lot of people. I mean, I have heard that there's like 30,000 flights a day.
Yes, there are about 450 million business trips a year in the U.S. alone.
Oh my gosh.
So that's about 40 million business travelers in the U.S. alone. And so, so the book is targeted towards business travelers, mainly because they've been neglected. But the book is really for anyone who wants to eat healthy or is currently eating healthy, but still, not sure if they're making the best choices, or they're eating healthy and they're still sick and they don't know why. Again, back to this issue of, well, what is really healthy? What does that mean? And tying the diet to optimum health. So I like to say that the book is really for anyone, but specifically for business travelers that are just ultimately challenged.
Right.
And, ultimately, I mean, so not only the business travelers, but I really think the audience for the book is also these companies that are putting employees on the road.
Yes.
Because the business traveler lifestyle is something that's fostered by the employer.
As I'm thinking about it, for the business traveler, when they're traveling, they're generally under stress. So you've got people traveling that are like, traveling wherever, on a vacation, who also could benefit from this. But it's mainly that business traveler that needs to do whatever they can to relieve stress. And I know a lot of airports now have places where you can go to get a massage. It may only be like a chair massage. Are we starting to see in airports healthier food? I mean, is that starting to happen more and more, or do you have to really become your own advocate and really pay close attention to what you're going to be eating?
You do need to pay close attention. One of the things I like to point out is they are experts of marketing, so you'll see a lot of these little airport food stands that say fresh, or they say gourmet, or, they got the nice little lime green color that gives you that false sense of security that it's healthy and farm fresh. And it's not.
Yeah.
But with that said, we always have to recognize the environment that we're in, and airports have a very unique environment in terms of how they get food in and out of the airport, timing, all of these things. So it's not going to be a perfect environment. But with that said, we can make a lot of efforts to find those places that are going to push us onto the positive side of the healthy eating spectrum. Because there is that spectrum between negative impact and positive impact, back to the choices that you make. So instead of going to the fast food joint and grabbing something that is going to be full of the three culprits, the fat, salt, and sugar, and then also conventionally grown, probably stored for a while, probably, hasn't been picked in the last day, but maybe in the last week or 2 weeks, these types of things that, we want to make an effort to try to pick the things that at least appear to us to be the freshest, because just the process of what you're going through in that scenario prepares you for the next scenario that you're going to be in. Again, going back to that, your environment is always going to change. What you choose to eat is a function of the environment that you're in. But with that said, you do need to hunt around. So, for instance, DIA, Denver International Airport, is my home airport. And there are two great restaurants that are there, one called Root Down and the other one called Etty's. And they really focus on farm to table and on Nouri-based menu items. And so when I have extra time, and it's not always the case, right? I mean, if you're rushing to your flight, you don't have that option. But if I have a long layover, I'll make sure I get over to the next terminal and I'll eat at Root Down, or I'll have my breakfast there if I've got a morning flight out.
Is that by any chance Root Down a chain or not?
No, it's not.
It sort of brings up a question about chains. Spent a little bit of time in the restaurant business and know that most chains are supplied by suppliers that, everything is just manufactured and processed. I mean, my experience is I always like to look for restaurants or even grocery stores that are individually owned.
I agree with you. Always the best option, because inevitably when you have chains that, they try to manage costs as much as possible. So they drive costs down. And I've spoken with a lot of them, and a lot of them that try to be on the healthy side, and they try to do as much as possible, like even sourcing locally. It depends on how they're structured, how much autonomy they have locally to make some of those sourcing choices. Mm-hmm. They can make recommendations, but they're not always adhered to.
What I love about this book is that it's phenomenally useful. So before we got on the podcast, you were talking about you wanted to keep it, small and simple. And can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. So I've been researching this for 15 years for my own, personal benefit needs. And so I've read a lot of these books. And what I found is they're usually long, dense. If they're diet books, they make you feel like a failure by chapter 1 because they become rigid in what you're supposed to do. And so I realized that approach had to change. And also, it needed to be written from the perspective of someone that experiences that same lifestyle. Because a lot of recommendations that are made in these other books, while they're probably very good recommendations, they're not always easily implemented depending on your lifestyle. So everything that I propose in the book was really from that perspective of how can I make it easy? How can I make it practical? How can I format and draft the book in a way that every page gives a nugget of information, but it also doesn't hit you over the head. I didn't want to be the health police.
Right. Yeah,
and, I really wanted people to be able to think critically on their own and to give them tools to filter out how they make these choices. And more importantly is empower them. Like each page you can turn, it's like, I get that. I can relate to that. Now I'm empowered. That was my approach to it. And then also to make it very graphically engaging so that it's not text heavy. So it doesn't feel like a dissertation. And it doesn't feel like hopefully it doesn't feel like I'm lecturing.
Yeah, well, I'd say that's totally accurate, and that describes the book. Yeah, it's really good. As you know, I got the book just a few days before the recording. I haven't had time to go completely in detail through it, but I thought to myself, you know what? I should just put myself on this book, this program. And I used to travel quite a bit, but I'm sitting here looking at this book going, oh my gosh, for somebody that really wants to turn it around for themselves, you don't have to be a traveler. You can start with this book for the reasons we talked about in terms of its simplicity.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a story. A recent colleague of mine asked me for a copy of the book, and he told me that he traveled every other week for about 10 to 15 years. He had his own business, traveled around the U.S. and the world. And then he said, the road almost killed me. And so I was curious to see what your book recommended. And so his story was that he had a heart attack on his drive back from the airport, returning from a business trip.
Wow.
And he lives in a rural area. And so 90 minutes away from the airport, and rural meaning you don't always have cell coverage.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so he said, I had a heart attack 30 minutes outside of the airport. So he was 10 minutes away from the next town. He knew he was having a heart attack. He pulled over to the side of the road, took 2 aspirin, because he said he carried the aspirin with him just in case someone else would have a heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
And he drove himself to the hospital. And they administered Effien, I think is the name of the appropriate cardiac medication. Anyway, so as a result of his quick thinking, he had no damage, but that was the end of his career. He was 59. He was 59 years old.
Pretty young for a heart attack.
Yes. And so he told me, he said he read the book and he said, Natasha, I wish this book was available at the time, because we all know and we all knew that, it was hard to figure out how to eat healthy. And, everybody kept telling us, well, you need to make healthy choices. But there was never a roadmap on how to do that. There was never a guidebook on how to do that. And so that's what my intent was with this book, is really for it to be a guidebook, a survival guidebook, to help people make their choices.
No, it's great. There was a period of time for about 3-4 years where I worked for a nutritional company, actually here in Carlsbad, California. But I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I became a regional manager and was traveling and training people. And, the drill was, travel and train. And it was, boy, what a challenge. So I really wish I had this back then. Where were you? Oh, yeah, you're probably just writing the book. I don't know. Published in 2013, is that right? Yeah, I think so.
Yes, December of 2013.
Yeah. One thing that's really fun I like to ask people is, can you talk a little bit about maybe one defining moment in your life? And do you know what I mean by defining moment?
I do. It's a hard one for me to talk about, but it was when my cousin died at the age of 14. He was a year younger than me. Head-on collision. For reasons I won't go into, he was driving the car and his friend was in the passenger seat. And he died and his friend survived. And I always ask myself, why was that? And I just realized from that moment and from that day, is that you never know what life is going to throw at you. Life is short, and we need to live it to our fullest extent. And that's the way I've lived my life, and that's the way I look at what we choose to eat, because we're making conscious choices about that can impact what that, why don't we call it, that end date. We all have a time when our time is up. And it could be in a car accident, it could be slipping on ice. It could be a fatal disease. It could be a whole host of things that take us away from the life that we're currently living on this planet. And what's important is just to live each moment to its fullest and enjoy everything that's around us, all the beauty that's around us. And I feel that when you're sick, or when you eat things that almost dampen your sensory network, if you will, that it cuts your life short in the experiences that you can have in living it in its fullest.
Well said. I've had my own defining moments, but I also like to create them. So one way I do that is I like to do a 3-day water fast once a month. And what happens with me is that I have a tendency to get hungry, and, I'm drinking good water. So it's like water, some minerals, but not a lot. Just sort of slow down. I don't drive. I just stay pretty quiet and sort of empty myself. And then when I come back, I'm able to make a better choice in terms of the food I eat, even exercise or anything else. But it's I think it's pretty important to just stop.
There's something else that I would like to share with you is that, so we started growing our own food.
Very
about
nice.
3 years ago now. Yes, because we'll be going into our 4th growing season. Amazing.
Congratulations.
Yes. And, one of the defining moments about that process is realizing the choices that you make when you grow food, because we realized that you're going to lose 1/3 of what you grow to Mother Nature, 1/3 to pests, and you get to keep 1/3. And what that means is that, at least for us, we have to grow for the whole ecosystem. So if we want more to meet our goals, we have to grow more because we only get to keep a third. But what I realized then is that, especially for people that are growing commercially, it's about yield, which means you want all of it.
Of course.
And if you want all of it, then that often means that you make some decisions that distort that process, right? And that's when we get into using chemicals and fungicides and pesticides and genetic modification, all of these things that have wound up adulterating our food system and compromising the nutrient value of our food system.
Yeah, you know what? I never really ever thought of it in those terms. So if you're only keeping a third and, the whole manufactured food system is trying to, keep more of it, yeah, that's where the chemicals and all the stuff comes in. How do you feel about GMO? I actually think I know, but...
So let's be clear on what GMOs are, I think, because sometimes people are confused, right? So genetic modification or genetically modified organism means that you've injected the gene of one species into another species, right? So, into a Brazil nut, you might insert the gene of a pig, for instance, or, a bacteria into corn, which is different from traditional hybridization, right? When you're cross-pollinating. Now, the problem that I see with this is that evolution hasn't played out yet. And so we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there are a lot of studies that have already shown that GMO foods are causing inflammation in the body or are associated with illnesses. But more importantly, I'm of the opinion that we should always be prudent in the decisions that we make and think about this, which is, this has been around for the last 20 years or so. That's not a very long evolutionary period of time.
No, it's not like 100,000 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting. I watched Michael Pollan's documentary last night, In Defense of Food. And, he basically said we have two choices, is that we can evolve along the current food system that includes genetically modified, processed, all of the things that we've come to associate with a modern supermarket, and adapt very painfully with illness and disease. Or we can choose to have a more simple approach to eating, which is, unprocessed and unadulterated. And I think that's the path that people are on today, is, figuring out which way they want to go.
Yeah, good. And they should. They should question everything. I mean, you've alluded to the fact that, on the internet, it's full of a lot of misinformation, a lot of marketing hype and all the rest of it, and people just really need to be their own advocate and find out for themselves.
I'll give you another story. Is that I was on the metro in Australia, and I saw a gentleman across from me. What at the time I thought he was rolling a joint, and I was thinking to myself, "Wow, this country's really progressive." And then I realized that he was just rolling himself a fresh cigarette from fresh tobacco, and he pulled out the bag. And I kid you not, in about 80-point font, it said, "This causes cancer."
Really?
Yes. And so, I said to myself, okay, well, you've been informed. And if that's the choice you want to make, then so be it. Just, as long as you're not smoking in my presence and compromising my health, that's your choice. You've been informed. Great. I think what is insidious about what's happened in our food system is that people are not informed about what's in their food, and what they are informed about are often very superficial. And so my view is the more informed you can be, and this also gets into GMO labeling and all sorts of labeling, is frankly, people should know. And, as a former international trade attorney, I can tell you is that generally industry doesn't like labeling if it's going to distort consumer behavior.
Yeah, exactly, i.e. sales.
And
Right.
so the fact of the matter, they say, well, if people knew, then they wouldn't buy it. Well, if there was nothing wrong with it, then they would probably still buy it, but they have a right to know.
Yeah, they do.
And to make that choice. And the same thing in restaurants, because I don't know if you know this, but less than 1% of agricultural lands in the United States are available for organic farming.
Oh, man.
Which means use of no chemicals, right?
Right.
So that means 99% of the lands and the foods that are being produced with chemicals. So to me, and people often ask me, it's like, well, how can you be so disciplined? And it's not so much a discipline question. It's like, do you want those chemicals in your body or not? It's a very simple question. Mm-hmm. But what's not so simple is getting access to that anymore when only 1% of agricultural lands in the U.S. So, one of the things that I'm hoping happens as a result of my book is that if more and more business travelers realize, that they should be eating Nouri and start demanding Nouri, is that will shift supply. Mm-hmm. But you have to have demand in order to shift supply and production. Mm-hmm. And so that's my hope.
Yeah, I know. I can tell. I mean, your passion's wound up here in the last few minutes. And I mentioned it just because I told you earlier that it's like, I have some ideas. So it's like, no, I'm serious. It's like the company I worked for here in Carlsbad, I had a relationship still with, many of the people that still work there, including the director of HR. And she's the one that's responsible for making sure all the training's done and all the rest of it. So every time they hire somebody, there's 1,000 salespeople in the United States, every one of those people should get this book because they're traveling a lot.
You got it.
Yeah. So listen up, everyone out there. Just go to travelhealthybook.com and pick up a copy and give it to your director of HR. Does that make sense?
Give it to your director of HR. Give it to your corporate wellness director. Oh, yeah. Give it to your sales director. Anyone that is managing a travel budget or putting people on the road. Mm-hmm. And, that can be sales director, VP of sales. Mm-hmm. It can be, the CIO department, director of IT, anybody that's traveling. Mm-hmm.
And, it's easy to see that actually a company would benefit greatly from it because, people are going to feel and perform better. It's really important.
Well, I can give you another statistic.
Love it.
So the average meal per diem, travel meal per diem, is about $97 a day. Okay. And if you do the calculation of $1 of unhealthy food equals $5 of healthcare costs, so you multiply that across, somebody's got an average business trip of 3 days a week, and even at about I think I did the calculation at quarter time. That would result in potential healthcare costs of $47,000, $47,000 to $48,000 per business trip.
It's actually amazing that you would do that math, but I probably, after talking with you, I expect nothing less. I mean, given your background and stuff, right? No.
Yeah. So it hits the bottom line because the fact of the matter is it's a sunk cost. These companies, they're paying for meal reimbursements when people are traveling. It's a sunk cost. So what if they turn that sunk cost into an investment?
Yes. That makes sense.
And it doesn't take much for them to either give their employees a copy of the book or to help their employees find Nouri places to eat. It doesn't take that much to make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. In your book, you also list some resources, some apps and stuff that are available for people that are traveling, which is really, really good.
I do.
But, I'm sitting here thinking of my experience with this company I worked in, and as an inside regional manager, we were responsible for communicating with the field, and we did it mostly through text and email. So there's nothing that would stop any company from actually creating the infrastructure inside to be able to, to really support those teams of people out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, so many companies are starting to build wellness platforms. I mean, they can build us into their wellness platforms.
Yes. Possibly even gamify it, if you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
Make it
so
fun.
absolutely. In the book, I do talk about your health KPI, your key performance indicator. And, oftentimes people are measuring their cholesterol levels. But the one that I think is so incredibly important that gives a holistic view is your antioxidant score, because this measures
Really?
the health of measures the health of your immune system.
Great. So talk about that a little bit. As you know, I'm very curious about that for obvious reasons.
Yes.
I mean, I know what antioxidants are. As you know, I'm hyper focused on hydrogen right now. Have been for a while. So talk a little bit about that.
So the company that commercialized the biophotonic scanner is called Nu Skin, and the research was done by, I believe it was the University of Utah, and they created this scanner initially to detect macular degeneration in the eye. Oh, wow. And in practice, it wasn't so easy. And so Nu Skin helped them commercialize it so that it's a little laser. It's a 3-minute scanner that scans the palm of your hand. Oh. And what it's reading for is a family of antioxidants, carotenoids. And what I love about it is, unlike a urine test or a blood test, which is just a snapshot of what's going on in your body at that moment in time, when you read the carotenoid levels in the tissues, it's reading what's been going on over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Oh, really?
So you can't spike it.
Right. That's
Right?
Exactly. That's what you're talking about. Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it gives you a sense of where you are. And so, because of FDA rules, they can't say that, this is indicative of X, Y, or Z. But what they have consistently shown is that if people score below 10,000, and the average is around 24,000, is considered a pretty good marker for your immune system. But people that score below 10,000, they tell them, I'd suggest you go to a doctor and do a regular checkup or something. They have routinely found that those people have had problems. They've had something wrong with them, serious. Now, now your next question is probably, how did you discover this antioxidant scanner? And so there's a friend of mine who was a distributor for Pharmanex, which is the supplemental arm of Nu Skin. And a couple of times he would say, you should really try out this antioxidant scanner. And he kept bugging me about it. And finally I said, all right. And my view was, if I score high, it validates my lifestyle. If I score low, the problem's their technology.
Yeah, good.
So at the time, I scored, I think it was like 59,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the highest score in the state at the
really?
time. And I outscored the people in the company.
Nice.
Without using their supplements, by the way.
Yeah.
I was just, because he said to me, you'll probably score high because you juice regularly and everything. So vegans tend to score the highest. And my highest score has been 80,000. And what I love about it is, even though my diet may not change, but it also demonstrates, it reflects the stress in your life. So at very stressful levels in my life, I've gone down to about 62,000, maybe 59,000, 57,000. I haven't gone below like 57,000. But it's interesting that my diet hasn't changed. It's my stress that has changed, which shows how your immune system is reacting to stress, meaning I may not be sleeping as well. I'm traveling a lot more, all of these things. But I think that antioxidant scanner And that score is a great way to gamify things, because the people in the company, that's what they were doing, is that they started competing on their scores. So when they would go out to lunch together, they would all make sure they had salads, because they had to make sure their score was higher than the other person.
Fun. Fun.
And I think it would be great in a school environment, as well, to get people to think about how the food impacts them. And it's such a non-invasive, easy way to do it.
That's amazing.
It's absolutely fantastic. So that's one of my key KPIs.
Yeah, nice. Well, I obviously want to find out more about all that, but probably save it for another time. I mean, there's quite a bit right there, and obviously I need to do some research on it myself.
John, I just want to say one thing is how I found out about you is because my friend and colleague, Chris Babayotti, just wrote a book on called Farewell Jet Lag, where he talks about the things we should be doing from a lifestyle, nutrition, supplements perspective in order to reduce, if not eliminate, jet lag. And the two things that he talked about in his book from a hydration perspective is the importance of hydrogen in your body so that your cells are properly nourished, but also because hydrogen acts as a protective barrier against radiation. Yeah. And so
that's something about hydrogen I haven't heard before.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So apparently, because one transatlantic flight is equal to about 50 X-rays.
So where is all that coming from in terms of the radiation?
It's the natural radiation in the atmosphere.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so fun to have someone like you on a podcast that knows more than I. I love it. And I don't proclaim to know all that much. I don't have any degrees or anything else like in nutrition or anything else, but I am self-studied, and it's just a pleasure to have you on.
Well, I thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm not going to end it yet before I ask this question, which is...
fantastic.
So when you think about if there was something you think that everyone needs to hear that would be considered like a health tip or something that they really just need to hear that maybe they're not hearing from anywhere else, what do you think that would be? What would you have to say to them?
Change the word for food.
Change the word for food.
Yes. Nouri is the new food.
Nouri's the new food. Love it.
Stop using the word food, because food at this point has no meaning. Because it's being manufactured in so many different ways that people don't understand.
So it's an anomaly, actually.
Yes.
In other words, it sort of doesn't exist.
Yes.
Not in a nutritious way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because on Michael Pollan's documentary last night, one of the things he talked about is he says, well, eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. And then he had a definition for food because he went through all about how food has changed and we don't really know what we're eating anymore. But I believe he said you should eat a food. What did he call it? A food like an alternative food like substitute or something like that. And I thought about that and I said, but how does anybody process what that means? So again, back to, I think the most important thing for people to do and think about is change their vocabulary on how to describe what they eat for optimum health. And self-servingly, it's my new word, Nouri.
Yeah.
But I think the word food has just become so adulterated that it has no meaning anymore for people. And calling it real food, what's real food? And who defines real? So it's so important to get back to what is it that we should be eating, and then how is it actually grown, produced, and prepared that then affects its Nouriness. Because the other thing I like to say is that, if you're a chicken lover and you eat, you're getting organic chicken, but you deep fry it, it might have originally started out as
Yeah.
Nouri because it was organically grown, not only organically, but pasture,
Yeah.
pasture raised, because factory chickens are not Nouri. But if you deep fry it, then you've reduced its Nouriness, you know, so not quite there. So again, all of these different things for people to think about.
Yeah, it's nice. I'm also a big proponent of experimenting. I think I might have told you on the phone when we were talking that I read Dr. David Perlmutter's book, Grain Brain. And I just put myself on a 1-week experiment. And I took grains and everything that, you know, was problematical coming out of the book, including gluten, completely out of my diet for a week. You know, I was about 3 days into it. And one thing I noticed is my digestion was a lot better for sure, but also my head just really cleared up. So he's a neurologist. So it was just like an experiment. Like, just try it for a week. Just see how it feels to you, and just feel your body, or just see how you feel. So
that is so important, because that gets to the other piece of really listening to your body. And, you know, the relationship we have with our body is the most intimate one we will ever have. And so many of us treat it like, well, we've outsourced it to doctors, or we've outsourced it to nutritionists. We've outsourced it to all these other people that supposedly know better than we do. And I like to say they are very good at identifying or diagnosing issues, but you are the one that really knows your body. You know how you're reacting to what you put in your mouth and to what you drink. And so when you experiment with a cleanse, or when you experiment with eliminating certain foods, you're now helping yourself to really listen to your body and pay attention to how it's reacted. And that is so very important.
Well, I want to thank you very, very, very much for being available on the last day of 2015. This has been really great.
It has been wonderful, and I hope people make their New Year's resolution to travel safe and well, and to make the healthy choice. Or the Nouri choice is what I should say.
Make the Nouri choice. And if you want to find out more, just go to www.travelhealthybook.com. And I should also say that we may do a follow-up blab on this. So once again, if you go to alternativehealthtools.com, you can get a hold of us there from the Contact Us page, and to find out more. And there also the About page gives a little information about Blab and how to get started. Or you can email us at feedback@alternativehealthtools.com. I was also going to ask you, because you know what, we can go on and on here, but do you actually do consulting with individuals?
You know, I can. I haven't, to be honest. So, but I'm happy to talk to people one-on-one. Okay. You know, if that helps. That wasn't really my direction and my intent with the book.
Sure.
I know a lot of people that write books are coaches, or, but I mean, I am an independent consultant, a strategy consultant, but I haven't necessarily been focused on coaching in this area. Right. But with that said, I am co-founder of the Global Business Travel Wellness Associates, and we're a consortium of wellness advisors. And so Chris focuses on jet lag. Jane McAllister, for example, focuses more on fitness and the overall travel environment. I focus a little bit more on food. And but we are working with companies on how to identify whether they have a travel wellness program, because there's a difference between travel wellness and corporate wellness. So that is something that we do.
Thanks for visiting us. We really hope everybody has a wonderful 2016. It's certainly looking good from this end. How about you, Natasha?
It's looking good.
Great. All right, so until next time, this is AlternativeHealthTools.com podcast.